I like the 24-team playoff thing. But when you look at that, Chicago and Montreal should absolutely not be there. Yeah, they were on the fringes, but they're not good enough, period. End of story. And if this were a normal season, what the NHL is probably having a hard time understanding right now is that, and I think that this is going to become a reality as the NHL starts to expand to, say, 33, 34 teams, is there needs to be more teams in the playoffs. And the MLB has noticed this too. The reason the MLB has the wild card game is because for, 65, 70% of the league, September was a throwaway. Nobody's in the playoffs. So why would I still go to the game? So they're throwing these games and 10,000 people are showing up when it was 50,000 people before. The NHL is going to have to eventually add more teams to the playoffs. The reason why it worked so well in the 80s is there was 25, 26 teams and 16 of them made it. It's good to have more teams in the playoffs revenue-wise. I'm just suggesting that if you want to keep it competitive and rolling, to me, you want as many good players on the teams that are going to the playoffs as possible. You want small and big market teams able to spend that kind of cash to bring them in. And you want to open up the gates. And I just don't think, why are we protecting franchises that lose constantly, whether it's on purpose or not? Why are we protecting that? I understand revenue sharing. I get that part of it. But from a competitive standpoint, at a certain point, it's not the league's problem that you suck, Buffalo. It's your problem, right? That's
the number one team, right?
That's the
number one team in this conversation.
Bingo.
I also look at a team like Ottawa, who doesn't seem to want to contribute any money to the health of the league. They're just kind of, okay, how can we pinch every penny just keep our franchise running and not contribite any money to any of these other teams.
Completely problem too.
Completely agree.
I feel like that's a problem.
Now that's not, let me just say this, because people will message us this. I feel like you should know this, but that's not the fans, right?
No.
That's ownership. And the Pagulas saved sports in Buffalo, but they haven't been able to do anything with the Sabres. And frankly, the Bills haven't been great either. They're just, at what point, why are we putting a competitive life support in place for teams that just suck? Hire better management, hire better scouts. You're going to get the same amount of revenue anyway. And, because there is revenue share around the league. Hire better, buy better players. Don't sign Matt Molson and Jeff Skinner to ridiculous contracts and figure it out, man. Just figure it out.
That's mean. You're being mean now.
I'm sorry.
You're being mean. Oh, my holy Lord. This is just something I came across when I was doing a trade tree. Just talking about the futility of the Buffalo Sabres. In 2014, these guys had 6 picks in the first 3 rounds. They had a first, 3 seconds, and 2/3. 3 of them have played NHL games. One is goaltender Jonas Johansson. He's played 6 games. Another is Brendan Lemieux, who's not even on the freaking team anymore. And their best one is Sam Reinhart, who they picked 2nd overall. He's got 255 points in 400 games, which is good, but it's not as good as Leon Draisaitl, who was selected with the very next pick. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to feel bad for the Buffalo Sabres as an organization.
And let me ask you this. When we look back in sports in perpetuity, right? We're looking back and talking about sports' greatest moments. You look at the NHL, you look at the MLB, you look at the NBA. What do we look at?
Wins.
Exactly. Have you heard anything about in the Michael Jordan documentary how great the parity in the NBA was? Oh my God, I can't believe so much parity. We just didn't know who was going to finish 8th, and it was so exciting. No, it was fucking Bulls, and it was amazing. And that, by the way, got me into basketball. I can remember vividly watching that Utah Jazz Bulls series that they haven't even talked about on The Last Dance yet. No. I remember them going head-to-head with the Pacers. I watched that, and I was not a basketball fan. And or you look at baseball, the Yankees runs in the 90s. Montreal's runs in the late 70s, the Edmonton Oilers in the 80s. Everybody talks about the Penguins in Detroit in the 2000s. Chicago, LA this past decade. No one's talking about, God, I am so glad that the Minnesota Wild got into the playoffs for 10 years in a row and were eliminated in the first round. So great. Man, how awesome was that for the game? Really excited about it. Let's tell a big old story. It's a participants league. It's not a winners league.
The boring dance.
The boring,
the no one cares dance.
The never-ending fucking dance is what it's called. It doesn't end.
It also that doc, or that series rather, has helped me realize how important star power is on both a personal and team basis. Like, and how there were teams in there that won championships and just didn't even get mentioned. Like, no one cares.
Yeah.
The only team in there really is the Pistons. I didn't hear anything about the Rockets.
No.
In those couple of years, no one cares. No one cares. It's like the only championships that matter are back-to-backs. Like, when you're having a conversation, that's not to take anything away from, like, let's say the St. Louis Blues. You know, you finally won one. It was super special to your fan base. But when you're just talking about, as a fan of hockey, or rather a fan of basketball, you measure everything up against the dynasties, up at the champions of champions. You know, oh, we won back-to-back. Yeah, twice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It really, it's really put into perspective.
And they
what is important when we talk about
retired.
The greatest of all time. Sorry, what?
And they would have won 4 if Michael hadn't retired. That next
could have won 8.
I don't know about
that. Next year's team was pretty good, man. They made it.
They were
second round without.
Yeah, but there. Yeah, you don't factor in like the burnout factor.
Right. That's fair.
MJ, because MJ played every game so hard, and I think you see that in the doc. But like you go back to the NBA and just the league is built on just champions winning over and over and over again. It's from 1984 to 98. Only 5 different teams won the NBA championship.
Right.
Like, and is that a problem
to the NBA during that time?
Like,
it blew up.
Right. It grew precipitously.
At the time, it was the biggest sport in the league.
Shocking, right? It's weird how that happens.
Yeah.
How the NBA went from empty stadiums in the early 80s, and they did, to the biggest sports. Well, I guess is the NFL biggest or is the NBA biggest? It doesn't matter. NBA is mainstream That's how big the NBA is here. It's mainstream pop culture.
Yeah.
LeBron James isn't just a basketball player. He's a million other things. Michael Jordan was a worldwide sensation. You know, you don't get that in football. Not even Tom Brady, I don't think, is that.
He was in a Bugs Bunny movie.
Yeah.
Mid-career.
And it was 2 guys, Magic and Larry Bird, who saved it in the mid-'80s, like you're talking about. It was 2 guys who permeated pop culture in the middle of the 80s that grew that league and made it what it is today.
Bingo.
So
God, I miss sports.
100%. But I think we got to get away from this idea that we have to put, I understand revenue sharing. I don't understand point sharing. Like, I don't need to give, if I didn't earn 2 points, I don't need you to give me half of yours. I just don't. I didn't earn it. I don't belong.
Adam, let me throw out a question. I think I asked this to Jesse last show. I'm not sure. If you can come up with a way to safely house and test 24 NHL teams.
Hell of a task.
If you can find a way to do it, though, which they seem pretty confident.
Oh, that's a good question.
Why can't you do it for 31? If you can do it for 24, which is an unbelievable amount of people, why can't you do it for 31? Well, we're having this conversation about 9 months off. If you can do it for 24, can you not do it for 31?
So, yeah, I think you can. The first answer to that is yes. The second answer is it financially worth it? So you got to look at the cost to benefit ratio here.
You got to ask those 7 teams.
The cost of those, the 7 teams. Come on. Those guys
they won't say come on. They'll say come on.
Dude, even the kid, like Brendan Gallagher came out this week and was like, I don't know if I want to play. Like, honestly.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Like, funny. Come on. I mean,
he's a TikTok star now.
Yeah. Well, of course. And you know what? Probably more money in it. But, I think it comes down to, are we really like, okay, so we're going to have the Leafs go up against the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah.
And Austin Matthews gets a knee injury against the Detroit Red Wings.
In the middle of August.
Connor McDavid has a knee injury against who's the shittiest team in the West? One of the California teams.
So
LA.
it's better that they sustain those injuries during the playoffs.
Yes, at least they sustain them in a meaningful game.
It's the Leafs are 3 points up on a playoff spot. Every game they play for the rest of the regular season is meaningful.
Doesn't matter, pandemic. So for me, I want for those 24 teams, I want the hockey to matter.
And
also,
Adam, you're against bringing back everyone.
Yes, of course. And you've got to also look at schedule.
I don't think it's of course. I think there's an argument to be made for finishing it out to a number for everyone.
Well, I think Adam's pro 16 teams.
I'm pro 24, but I also think here's why I'm pro 24 beyond that is that you do need to get as many teams back on the ice as possible, right? You need the TV rights and all that stuff. Beyond that, like from a business perspective, the other side of this is scheduling. Okay, so you bring all 31 teams back because why not bring this bloated league right on back?
Because Steve wants it.
Hub season. Yeah,
is the reason.
Finish the season, but scheduling becomes a major issue at that point because when does this season end? If the season ends in late October and they have a month off and then they're jumping back in December 1st, like this is the problem. I don't think you have time anymore. Maybe a month ago we could have had that conversation. But remember, the playoffs are 2 months long, and these guys are not going to take just a month off in between the season and the next season. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think if they're going to do it, they're doing it this summer, and it ends at the end of September.
So what about this?
The World Series takes over after that. Do you want the Stanley Cup and the World Series going head to head? If you're the NHL, no, you do not. You do not.
Okay, let me throw this out there then. So on average, teams have about a dozen games left, roughly. What's wrong with playing these dozen games, right? And then you take a dozen off the next season, you start it in January instead of December. I'm sure that's an option they've talked about.
Because Steve, fuck those teams.
And what is the point of Detroit playing games?
Exactly. Fuck those teams. And Detroit fans would tell you that. Yeah. Like if the Leafs were where they were in 16 and they sucked, I'd be like, no, they're not coming back. Why?
Yeah.
For what?
That's true.
There's no reason for it. There's no good reason for it.
Yeah. There's just no and I'm sorry, but if I'm Gary Bettman, I don't want Connor McDavid playing anyone from California and going down. I'm finally going to get Connor McDavid into the goddamn playoffs. I'm not fucking it up against a shitty team that doesn't have a chance in hell.